Most people think ancestral gifts are passed down as obvious talents. They imagine a musician born into a musical family, or a strategist born into generations of leaders, or a healer raised among people who already understood compassion. Sometimes that happens, but often the deeper inheritance is far quieter than that. A lineage usually transfers its intelligence through instinct long before it becomes skill. You notice yourself reacting to life in certain ways without fully understanding where those responses came from. You may notice this when you enter situations other people find confusing, but something inside you already knows how to move. One person naturally reads emotional tension in a room before anyone speaks. Another immediately senses patterns inside systems, numbers, or structures without formal training. Someone else can survive pressure that would collapse another person because endurance was quietly shaped into the nervous system across generations. The inheritance often arrives before the explanation does. That is why many people spend years carrying gifts they only recognize later. This changes the way you look at your family history. Most people only search their lineage for trauma, dysfunction, or limitation because pain leaves visible marks. But lineages also carry solutions, adaptations, sensitivities, and forms of perception developed through repeated human experience. A family that survived instability may unknowingly pass down heightened intuition. A lineage shaped by migration may pass down adaptability and environmental awareness. A bloodline that endured silence may eventually produce someone capable of deep emotional listening because they learned to detect what was never spoken aloud. You start realizing that many instincts are not random personality traits at all. They are forms of accumulated intelligence shaped through repetition across generations. The body remembers patterns long before the conscious mind organizes them into language. That is why some people feel drawn toward certain paths, even when their environment never encouraged those directions. Something older than conscious preference is often involved in the movement. This is also why your deepest abilities may not initially feel impressive to you. Familiar instincts rarely feel extraordinary from the inside because you have lived with them your entire life. The person who naturally understands emotional undercurrents may assume everyone notices what they notice. The person capable of rebuilding after devastation may believe resilience is normal because it has always existed within them. Many ancestral gifts hide behind the sentence, I thought everybody could do that. What feels ordinary to you is sometimes the exact intelligence your lineage spent generations developing. You may notice something important when you begin observing your life this way. The gifts often exist beside the wounds rather than separate from them. In many cases, the same environment that produced suffering also produced refinement. A child raised around emotional unpredictability may develop extraordinary sensitivity to tone, energy, and behavioral shifts. Someone forced to navigate instability may unconsciously strengthen adaptability, pattern recognition, and internal awareness. This does not glorify pain, but it does reveal that human beings continuously extract intelligence from experience even while struggling inside it. That changes the meaning of ancestral healing. Healing is not only removing damage from the system, healing is also learning how to separate the wisdom from the suffering so the intelligence can continue without the distortion attached to it. Many people reject their lineage entirely because they only associate it with pain. But rejecting everything often means abandoning valuable capacities that were hidden inside difficult experiences. Maturity begins when a person can say, I do not need to continue the harm in order to preserve the strength that emerged from surviving it. You can see this clearly in families where certain patterns repeat across generations. One generation survives through emotional shutdown. The next generation develops sensitivity because they grow up trying to understand what nobody expressed. The next generation may finally become capable of emotional articulation because the sensitivity matured into awareness. What looked like disconnected personalities across generations was actually a long developmental process unfolding through different human lives. The lineage was slowly trying to solve a problem. This is where many people begin understanding why they feel strangely connected to certain abilities, interests, or callings. Some people inherit rhythm before they inherit confidence. Others inherit perception before they inherit language for what they perceive. Someone may carry leadership instincts while simultaneously fearing visibility because earlier generations associated visibility with danger. The gift and the fear often arrive together because they were shaped in the same environment. That contradiction confuses people until they realize both patterns belong to the same inheritance structure. Once this becomes visible, you stop judging yourself so quickly for internal conflict. A person may deeply desire expression while simultaneously fearing exposure. Another may crave intimacy while instinctively protecting emotional distance. These contradictions are not always signs of brokenness. Sometimes they are transitional states between inherited survival patterns and emerging conscious identity. You are watching older protective mechanisms coexist with newer forms of development that have not fully stabilized yet. This also explains why different people awaken different capacities under pressure. Some individuals become clearer during crisis instead of collapsing. Others suddenly access courage, precision, creativity, or leadership they never displayed before. Pressure often activates dormant ancestral intelligence because the nervous system recognizes familiar conditions. The body sometimes remembers how to navigate difficulty before the conscious mind understands what is happening. This is why transformation frequently feels less like becoming someone new and more like uncovering something that was already waiting underneath. You may notice how this shifts your relationship with identity itself. Instead of asking only, "Who am I?" you begin asking, "What has been moving through this lineage trying to become conscious?" That question opens a different perspective entirely. You stop viewing yourself as an isolated personality disconnected from history. You begin recognizing yourself as part of a longer developmental arc where certain capacities, sensitivities, and insights were slowly refining across time. This perspective also softens unnecessary shame. Many people secretly believe they are weak because they struggle with sensitivity, intensity, emotional depth, or unusual perception. But often these traits exist because the system became highly adaptive in response to complexity. The nervous system learned to process more information because survival required greater awareness. What initially felt like a burden may eventually reveal itself as a form of perception that simply lacks proper understanding and direction. That is why ancestral gifts are often discovered through attention rather than achievement. They reveal themselves in the way you naturally interpret situations, connect ideas, respond to pressure, or sense meaning beneath appearances. One person instinctively organizes chaos. Another instinctively restores emotional balance in groups without realizing it. Someone else naturally detects hidden motivations, subtle inconsistencies, or future consequences before others notice them. These tendencies are rarely random. They are usually carrying a history behind them. The deeper realization is that inheritance is not static. Many people unconsciously imagine lineage as something fixed, as though they were only receiving completed traits from the past. But every generation modifies the inheritance before passing it forward. Your awareness changes the pattern itself. When you become conscious of what was unconscious in previous generations, the lineage begins reorganizing through you instead of merely repeating through you. That is where responsibility quietly enters the conversation. Once you recognize the gifts inside your lineage, you also begin seeing where refinement is still needed. Sensitivity without grounding becomes overwhelm. Resilience without emotional openness becomes isolation. Strategic intelligence without compassion becomes manipulation. Every inherited strength requires conscious balancing or it eventually hardens into distortion. Development is not only about awakening gifts, it is about learning how to carry them in a way that creates coherence instead of fragmentation. You start understanding why some people feel called to work that appears strangely specific to their nature. The storyteller feels alive when translating emotional experience into language. The healer naturally studies suffering because their perception continuously moves toward restoration. The strategist sees systems everywhere because the mind was shaped to recognize structural movement. The teacher instinctively simplifies complexity because clarity itself became part of the inheritance. Many callings are not arbitrary career preferences. They are the visible expression of deeper developmental currents finally reaching articulation. And once you begin seeing human beings this way, the world itself starts looking different. You stop seeing families only as collections of personalities and begin recognizing them as living streams of adaptation, intelligence, memory, and unfinished transformation moving across time. Some lineages are refining endurance, others are refining creativity, intuition, leadership, emotional awareness, or relational depth. The movement is rarely clean or linear, but patterns begin revealing themselves once you know how to look. You may even notice that certain instincts inside you no longer feel accidental anymore. The things you were repeatedly drawn toward despite confusion, resistance, or lack of external encouragement begin forming a clearer shape. What once looked like random interest may actually be the early language of deeper inheritance trying to become conscious through your life. And once a person starts recognizing that movement clearly, they often begin listening to themselves in an entirely different way. You may notice that ancestral gifts often become visible through repetition long before they become visible through understanding. The person keeps returning to the same type of work, the same emotional role, or the same inner fascination without fully knowing why. One individual repeatedly becomes the stabilizing force inside unstable environments. Another naturally becomes the translator between different personalities, cultures, or perspectives. Someone else keeps feeling drawn toward hidden structures, patterns, or symbolic meaning because their perception continuously searches beneath appearances. These movements are rarely accidental, even when they appear ordinary from the outside. This becomes easier to recognize once you stop defining gifts only through performance. Modern culture trains people to believe a gift only matters if it produces status, income, recognition, or measurable success. But many of the most important inherited abilities first appear as ways of perceiving reality rather than ways of achieving within it. The person who instinctively detects dishonesty before others notice may not initially view that as intelligence. The individual who naturally calms emotional tension in a room may not realize they are regulating environments through presence alone. Some gifts are relational before they are professional. You begin understanding why certain people feel exhausted by environments other individuals tolerate easily. Sensitivity is often misunderstood because people assume all nervous systems process experience at the same depth. They do not. Some lineages developed heightened environmental awareness because survival required noticing subtle changes quickly. That awareness can later appear as emotional sensitivity, intuitive pattern recognition, artistic depth, or strong energetic boundaries depending on how the individual learns to work with it. What seems like fragility from one perspective may actually be increased perceptual bandwidth from another. This changes the meaning of emotional overwhelm entirely. Sometimes overwhelm is not weakness. Sometimes it is untrained perception carrying more information than the conscious mind knows how to organize. A person notices tone shifts, contradictions, emotional undercurrents, hidden tensions, and environmental instability simultaneously without understanding that they are processing far more input than those around them. The nervous system becomes overloaded, not because perception is defective, but because the individual has not yet learned how to stabilize heightened awareness inside modern conditions. You can see this pattern clearly in people who were called too sensitive throughout childhood. Many of them eventually discover that their sensitivity was actually accurate perception without proper language or guidance. They noticed emotional shifts before others admitted them. They felt instability before visible conflict emerged. They detected hidden dynamics beneath surface behavior long before the environment acknowledged those realities openly. The problem was not always that they imagined too much. Sometimes the problem was that they perceived more than the people around them were comfortable admitting. That realization changes how a person relates to their own instincts. Instead of constantly suppressing inner signals to appear normal, they begin investigating what those signals may actually be trying to communicate. The body stops feeling like an obstacle and starts feeling like a form of intelligence. Emotional reactions become information rather than immediate evidence of dysfunction. Inner tension becomes something to study instead of something to instantly erase. This does not mean every feeling is automatically correct, but it does mean feelings often contain data worth understanding. You may notice how this naturally leads into questions about purpose. Most people search for purpose as though it exists completely separate from who they already are. They imagine purpose as a distant assignment waiting somewhere outside their current nature. But purpose often emerges through the refinement of inherited capacities that already exist within the individual. The person repeatedly drawn toward healing, organizing, teaching, protecting, creating, or guiding is usually responding to patterns already embedded deeply within their perception and nervous system. This is why imitation rarely creates fulfillment for long. A person can force themselves into roles admired by society while still feeling internally fragmented because the role does not match the deeper structure of their inherited intelligence. Someone shaped for emotional insight may suffer inside environments requiring constant emotional suppression. Someone built for creative emergence may deteriorate inside excessively rigid systems. Another person designed for strategy and structure may feel anxious inside chaotic, undefined environments. The nervous system continuously signals alignment and misalignment even when the conscious mind ignores it. You start realizing that many forms of depression, exhaustion, and inner numbness emerge when a person lives too far away from their natural patterning for too long. Human beings can survive misalignment for years, but survival is not the same thing as coherence. Eventually, the body begins reducing energy toward pathways that feel deeply disconnected from authentic movement. Motivation collapses because the system no longer experiences meaningful resonance with the direction being pursued. The person thinks they lost passion when in reality they lost relational connection to their deeper structure. This is also why inherited gifts frequently reactivate during moments of crisis or transition. When external structures collapse, people often reconnect with capacities that were buried beneath adaptation and social conditioning. Someone suddenly discovers leadership during instability. Another discovers deep compassion after personal loss. A person who spent years disconnected from creativity unexpectedly begins writing, building, or expressing after emotional rupture changes their priorities. Crisis removes artificial structures, and whatever remains underneath often reveals the deeper inheritance more clearly. You may notice something important here. The gift itself is rarely the final destination. The inherited capacity is usually the doorway into a larger developmental process. Sensitivity teaches discernment. Leadership teaches responsibility. Creativity teaches translation between imagination and reality. Strategic intelligence teaches consequence awareness. Emotional depth teaches relational truth. The gift initially appears as ability, but eventually reveals itself as a path of refinement shaping the entire person. That is why gifts become dangerous when disconnected from maturity. A perceptive person without emotional grounding may become paranoid. A charismatic person without integrity may become manipulative. Someone with strong intuitive awareness but no self regulation may become consumed by projection and fear. Every inherited intelligence requires balancing structures, or the same capacity that could guide development begins creating distortion instead. Human beings do not only inherit strengths, they also inherit the responsibility to consciously shape how those strengths are expressed. This changes how you view older generations as well. You stop seeing your ancestors only through the lens of what they lacked and begin noticing what they carried without fully understanding. Many people inherited gifts they never had safe environments to develop consciously. Some carried extraordinary emotional intelligence but lived in cultures that demanded suppression. Others possessed creative brilliance while surviving inside conditions focused entirely on survival and labor. Some had powerful intuitive perception but lacked language capable of framing those experiences coherently. The inheritance was present even when articulation was not. Once this becomes visible, compassion begins replacing simplistic judgment. You recognize that many people were carrying unfinished developmental processes they did not know how to complete. Some inherited resilience without softness, others inherited sensitivity without stability, some inherited vision without structure. Every generation receives partial refinement and partial fragmentation simultaneously. Human development is not a clean line of progress. It is an ongoing process of extracting coherence from accumulated experience across time. You can see this inside your own contradictions. The same person may carry deep compassion alongside difficulty trusting others. Someone may possess natural leadership while fearing visibility and rejection. Another may have profound intuitive awareness while doubting themselves constantly because earlier environments taught them to distrust inner knowing. The contradictions do not necessarily mean the inheritance failed. Often they reveal where development is still unfinished. The tension itself points toward the next stage of refinement. This is where awareness matters so much. Once a person becomes conscious of the patterns moving through them, repetition slowly becomes choice. They stop unconsciously reenacting inherited behaviors simply because those behaviors feel familiar. They begin separating instinct from conditioning, intelligence from fear, perception from projection. The inherited structure remains, but consciousness changes how the structure operates. What was once automatic begins becoming intentional. And the deeper you observe this process, the harder it becomes to believe that human beings are random collections of disconnected traits. You start seeing people as layered continuations of adaptation, memory, intelligence, and unfinished becoming. Every family carries certain strengths trying to stabilize and certain distortions trying to resolve. Every generation adds new awareness into the stream, whether consciously or unconsciously. And once a person truly begins recognizing what their lineage has been trying to develop through them all along, they often begin listening to their own life with a level of attention they never thought was possible. You begin realizing that ancestral inheritance is not only about what was passed down successfully, it is also about what remains unfinished. Every lineage carries abilities that were developed and abilities that were interrupted. Some families pass down survival without emotional openness because earlier generations lived through instability that required suppression. Others pass down creativity without grounding because imagination became a form of escape rather than integration. Some lineages carry deep spiritual sensitivity alongside chronic fear because perception expanded faster than safety did. The inheritance is rarely pure strength or pure damage. It is usually unfinished refinement moving through human lives across time. That understanding changes the way a person views their own internal conflicts. You stop asking why you contain contradictions and begin asking what those contradictions are attempting to reconcile. The individual who fears visibility while simultaneously feeling called toward expression may be carrying generations of unresolved tension around being seen. Someone who deeply values connection while instinctively distrusting people may be carrying emotional memories shaped through betrayal, instability, or survival pressure. The conflict itself often reveals the shape of the inherited lesson more clearly than the gift alone. You may notice how this creates repeating life patterns that feel strangely personal, even when they are deeply collective. Certain people repeatedly enter environments where they must learn boundaries because previous generations survived through self sacrifice. Others repeatedly encounter authority conflicts because autonomy was suppressed inside earlier family systems. Some continually feel responsible for stabilizing everyone around them because emotional regulation became their inherited role inside the lineage itself. The repetition is not punishment, it is unfinished structure seeking awareness. This is why inherited instincts can sometimes feel older than the current life experience logically explains. A person reacts strongly to instability before visible danger even appears. Another naturally protects younger people without consciously deciding to. Someone else immediately scans for emotional shifts in every room because their nervous system was shaped through generations where noticing subtle tension increased survival. These responses often appear automatic because they were reinforced repeatedly across long spans of relational experience. The body learns patterns long before the conscious mind explains them. Once you understand this, you begin seeing that healing is not merely emotional relief. Healing is structural refinement. It changes how inherited intelligence moves through the nervous system. The goal is not erasing ancestry from yourself. The goal is allowing inherited capacities to operate without inherited distortion controlling them. Sensitivity remains, but fear no longer dominates it. Leadership remains, but control softens into responsibility. Discernment remains, but suspicion no longer poisons every interaction. The gift survives while the distortion gradually loses authority. You can observe this process clearly in people who consciously interrupt destructive family patterns. Often, the first stage feels lonely because the nervous system initially experiences unfamiliar health as instability. A person raised around emotional chaos may unconsciously associate calmness with emotional distance. Someone conditioned through hyper independence may initially experience support as weakness or vulnerability. The body continues expecting the old environment even while the conscious mind wants transformation. This is why change often feels uncomfortable before it feels natural. That discomfort confuses many people because they assume alignment should always feel immediately peaceful. But development frequently begins through disorientation because the nervous system must reorganize around new relational realities. The person learning boundaries feels guilty at first. The person learning softness feels unsafe. The individual learning visibility fears rejection before confidence stabilizes. Growth often feels unnatural in the beginning precisely because the older structure was practiced longer. Familiarity and health are not always the same thing. You may notice something important here. Inherited gifts become clearer when a person stops using all their energy to survive themselves. As long as the nervous system remains trapped in constant defense, deeper capacities stay partially inaccessible. A person consumed by fear cannot fully explore perception. Someone overwhelmed by self protection struggles to express creativity freely. An individual locked in emotional exhaustion cannot sustain the refinement required for deeper intuition or meaningful purpose. Stability does not create the gift, but it allows the gift to emerge more coherently. This is why some people suddenly unfold later in life after years of confusion. Their intelligence was present the entire time, but the internal conditions necessary for refinement had not yet stabilized. Once emotional safety, self trust, or environmental alignment increases, capacities that seemed absent begin surfacing naturally. The person discovers they were never empty, they were compressed. What looked like lack of potential was often undeveloped access. You also begin understanding why certain families produce recurring strengths across multiple generations. One lineage repeatedly produces teachers, organizers, protectors, artists, strategists, healers, innovators, or spiritual seekers because certain forms of intelligence become reinforced through repetition and value systems. Children unconsciously absorb not only behavior but orientation toward reality itself. They inherit ways of perceiving, responding, prioritizing, and emotionally interpreting the world. Even silence teaches patterns. Even avoidance teaches patterns. At deeper levels, this means identity itself becomes more fluid than most people realize. You are not an isolated individual inventing yourself from nothing. You are also participating in larger streams of memory, adaptation, and unfinished development flowing through human continuity. This does not erase individuality, it contextualizes it. Your personal choices still matter enormously because consciousness determines whether inherited patterns continue unconsciously or evolve intentionally. But understanding lineage changes the scale through which identity is viewed. This is why awareness alone can alter future generations. The moment one person consciously transforms a destructive pattern, the emotional architecture of the lineage begins changing. A parent who learns emotional regulation interrupts cycles of fear based communication. Someone who heals deep shame changes the relational environment future children develop inside. A person who develops healthy boundaries teaches nervous systems around them that connection does not require self erasure. Consciousness reshapes inheritance in real time. You may notice how this transforms the meaning of responsibility. Responsibility is no longer only about personal success or failure, it becomes relational stewardship. Every action either reinforces fragmentation or strengthens coherence within the environments you touch. Every emotional pattern repeatedly expressed teaches nervous systems around you what reality feels like. Human beings continuously transmit internal structure through tone, behavior, attention, and relational presence, whether consciously aware of it or not. Inheritance never truly stops moving. That realization often creates deeper compassion for yourself as well. Many people secretly believe they should already be fully formed, emotionally clear, and internally unified without recognizing how much complexity they are actually carrying. Human beings are shaped through biology, environment, emotional memory, family systems, social conditioning, and lived experience simultaneously. The fact that contradictions exist inside you does not mean you are broken. It means multiple layers of development are interacting at once. Awareness allows those layers to gradually organize rather than unconsciously compete. Once someone begins seeing themselves this way, they often stop relating to their life as random suffering or isolated confusion. Patterns begin revealing continuity. Emotional reactions begin revealing structure. Repeating relationships begin exposing unfinished lessons rather than meaningless frustration. Even pain starts becoming more readable. Not smaller, not easier, but more intelligible. That is when a person often starts listening differently to their instincts. They become slower to dismiss what repeatedly calls them forward. They begin paying attention to what consistently restores energy instead of only chasing external approval. They notice which environments sharpen perception and which environments collapse it. They start asking not only what they want from life, but what life may have been trying to develop through them all along. And the deeper someone follows that question, the more they begin realizing that ancestral gifts were never meant to become cages of identity. They were meant to become starting points for conscious refinement. Every generation receives unfinished material. Every person inherits both coherence and distortion. But awareness creates the possibility that something carried unconsciously for centuries can finally become seen clearly enough to transform into something entirely new.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.